Good afternoon, everyone. So we are in Module 12 this week. A couple of things to talk about, as well as some new stuff. So we're going to talk about SVG and Canvas. We're also going to talk about Assignment 3, which has been revised a little bit to your benefit. You'll be happy to know. And the final assignment. So this is what's up for today. We've got some cool stuffs. We're going to take a quick look at Canvas, and then also looking at SVG, and then we're going to talk about assignment 3. We're actually going to start by talking about the final assignment. So let's do that before we get into anything else. So, as some of you or most of you are in the other class, we've kind of been focusing on this Lazy Tulip business for the most part, but also their website. And if you take a look at their website, it's definitely needs some help. It's lacking quite a bit in terms of design, usability, maybe even the information architecture. So we are going to help Lazy Tulip by doing a site redesign. That is going to be your final project. So just taking a look at the final project instructions. So that is available for you. Again, this will be due looking at our calendar. If we look at that, so today is the 29th. You have next week, as well as it's going to be due the week of our last class together. So in class, you will be doing a presentation with your group. And that doesn't have to be super intense or very long. You're just going to explain your design choices, why you did certain things, why you used that font or that color, why you decided to use grid instead of Flexbox. So just telling us about your design choices, why you made them, and showing us your stuff. So again, not a super intense presentation, but just a way to share with everyone what you've done. So, final assignment will be due the 13th, and you will have a presentation that day as well. So, still a couple of weeks to work on that. So, looking at that, it is a group assignment. If you want to, you can, if you prefer, you can work independently. That's fine. It's up to you. If you feel like you work better alone and you want to tackle this on your own, that's cool. But it is a group assignment, so you can divvy it up amongst your group members, work on different parts, and we'll get more into that as we talk about the project. It's 20% plus 10% of your final grade for the presentation. So the assignment itself, the website, is worth 20%, and then 10% for your presentation. So it's basically just pulling in everything that we've learned this semester. So we've looked at layouts, design patterns, we've looked at grid and Flexbox, we've looked at typography. We now are going to look at SVG and Canvas. Next week we'll do a little bit about CSS animations. So you're going to pull all of this knowledge, all the things that you know, all the things we've worked on to create a better site for the Lazy Tulip. All right. So combine and apply your knowledge of the various concepts covered in order to efficiently develop a website. So this is a very typical timeline for a website. So you don't have months and months to develop a website. A lot of times, especially for smaller businesses, it is like a 3-week development timeline. So it's not that this is a crazy timeline. It's you have a tight timeline, and that's what you have to work with. So this is the structure of the website that you are going to build. So the current site has a little bit more information. You don't need to include all that. All I'm looking for is your homepage, about, menu, news, and contact. The menu page, if you look at the site right now, it has quite a few different menu items. You don't have to include all of those. Just including the breakfast one or just the lunch one, that's fine. So don't think that you need to include 5 different pages for salads and sandwiches and so on. One menu page is fine. It will have a news page, so that will be just your basic blog. You can see that they don't really have a news page now. Oh, sorry, they do. They call it a blog. So you can grab the content right from there. You're just going to design a little bit better layout and so on, and put the information in a more user-friendly way. and then a very simple contact page. So that is the site map that you are working with. If you feel that it would work better to have everything, so all these pieces of information in a one-page scrolling site, I'm fine with that. It doesn't have to necessarily be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pages. If you feel like design-wise it makes sense to combine everything, that's fine. You can do that as well. So it could be a one-page long scrolling site, or you can divvy it up and have 5 different pages. That is up to you. So content for the site, you can either grab it right from the website itself, that's there for you, or you can just put some lorem ipsum in. That's fine as well. So to complete the project, layout, so I'm looking for implementation of either Grid, Bootstrap, or Flexbox, whatever you think works best in this situation, keeping in mind that your timeline is tight. So that's part of this project. You are working with a tight timeline, so you need to make decisions that make sense. So does it make sense to use Grid? Does it make sense to use Bootstrap and use a lot of the design components that are built into it? That's up for you to decide. You will need to justify your choices in the presentation component, so make sure you put some thought into this. Why did you choose Bootstrap? Why did you think that Grid was the way to go? So make sure you think about it first and then choose your tool that you're going to use. Also remember, many customers, if not most customers, will be accessing this site from a mobile device, so you need to make sure that it is definitely mobile friendly, but geared more towards mobile users. So the other component, graphics and dynamic elements. So once we've covered animations, we're going to cover SVG and Canvas today. You're going to include elements, include SVGs where it makes sense, any animations that make sense. You don't want to go overboard with your animations, but you do want to make the page a little bit dynamic and engaging, so including those as well. Design patterns, we've talked about those. So things like popovers, accordions, that would work well for the menu possibly. Carousels, anything that you feel would enrich the website, you can add those as well. Then there's a part for reflection, so reflect on your learning process. What was a challenge? What was something like a win? What did you accomplish? Anything you learned in the process? So just a quick reflection, nothing more than a couple paragraphs, even one paragraph could be enough. Just telling me about the reflection. You're going to complete that as a group. It's not individual, so you can do that together. So expectations for success, I'm looking at your layout, topography, graphics, design patterns, your reflection, and your presentation. For layout, it's effective, it uses appropriate tools, and works well on multiple viewports. So it looks good on a phone, it looks good on a desktop, and so on. Font choices and sizes are very appropriate and effective. Inclusion of dynamic elements and images are effective and enrich the website. So awesome sauce for design patterns. They're wisely chosen, effective, and help to enrich the website. Your reflection is very detailed, thoughtful, and complete. And your presentation, again, you're just telling us about the site, you're telling us about the choices you made, describing the experience, and justifying design and development decisions. So that's your final assignment. If you do choose to work in a group, it'll help to sort of spread out the work, but you'll need to think about things like version control. So if you're all working on the same assignment and you're uploading things to a server, there is the possibility that you will overwrite each other's files. So you want to make sure that you have some form of version control in place. So using something like GitHub would be a good idea. You can also think about how you're going to split up the work. So working on your CSS in a modular way would make sense maybe. So one person could tackle the topography, one person or two people could work on the layout, one person could do animations, and you could separate your CSS files that way. So these are all decisions you need to make as the development team. Or if you are choosing to go solo, you will make these decisions yourself. There's some things you don't have to worry about, obviously. So that is the final project. Again, you've got a couple weeks to work on that. You will have some time in class today as well as next week. Are there any questions about the final? No? Okay, so I have created, just because, so some of you are already in groups from the other class. Some of you are not in that class. So if you don't have a group and you're not really sure who to work with, just let me know. Again, you can work independently if you prefer. I have added a link on Blackboard. So if you go to Final Group Projects under Module 12, that link will take you to the Google Doc. And if you do have a group and you already know your group name, you can add your group. So maybe just put group 1 and all your group members' names. If you're looking for a group and you would like to work with a team, maybe we'll add a section. I'll add that right now. Looking for a group. And you can add your name there if you like. So go ahead and you can fill that out when you get a chance. Just letting me know. And if you're working independently, that's cool too. Just let me know. Just put your name up and maybe just solo beside your name. Alrighty, cool. So that is the final project. We are now going to move on and talk about SVG. We'll do some cool stuffs before that. So these are mostly SVG focused. So this is 30 awesome SVG animations for your inspiration. We're going to look a lot at SVGs today, a little bit at Canvas. But these are all the cool things that you can do with SVG. How many of you have worked with SVGs before and done some cool stuff? Anybody? Yeah, a couple? Cool. Okay, so some of us have worked with it, some of us maybe not. So these are, so something like a heart animation, this cool thing, that's awesome. That is created using CSS animations and probably some SVGs in there. So something like a menu toggle animation, again, we can create these icons using SVGs and then animate it, and so on. So I'll let you take a look. There's lots more. There's this little Rocket Man guy. Lots of cool little animations that you can take a look at. And I think probably most of them, yeah, most of them are on CodePen, so you can actually check out the code itself. So here's the JavaScript that's involved, here's the CSS, and then here we can see in the HTML, these are the SVGs that we're building, or they're building. All right, so that's that. Next one is another sort of roundup of examples. Apparently these will make your jaw drop. So synchronized animation and audio, that sounds pretty cool. Let's check that one out. Maybe not that cool. So that was, what was that? Animation audio, that's cool. What else? SVG filters. You can add those on HTML5 video. So there's some cool examples of integrations here. So working with audio and SVGs, working with video and SVGs, adding a third dimension to your SVG, that's cool too. So lots of cool stuff there. Check that out as well. So even applying SVG masks over your video, that could be pretty cool. And so this would also be good examples of maybe some things you can incorporate in your final project. So maybe something like a map, or you want to do a video, something like that. These are good examples to inspire you. Vector.com is the next one. So this is free vector graphic software. So free is always good. I know that a lot of you don't have access to Illustrator, so you're kind of wondering how you're going to work with SVGs. So this is an option. Illustrator also has a 30 free day trial, so you can use that as well, but this is also an option. There's actually quite a few free options that I'll show you later on that you can work with. This is cool, boxysvg.com. So this is a tool created for editing SVGs. It is for beginners as well as professional web designers and developers. Again, it's free, so that's cool as well. So you can take a look at that and maybe use that as one of your tools. And then I'm sure you know about this, but can I use? So we're going to look at SVGs in Canvas and make sure that we have cross-browser compatibility and we're able to use it across different browsers. But can I use can be used to check for anything. So any kind of CSS new thing that you're not sure whether it will be okay across multiple browsers, you can check it out and make sure that you have compatibility. So here, for example, is Flexbox. So looking good. This used to be much different, even probably a year or two ago. The support was not great. We can see we have a lot of green across the board. Of course, IE, never that great. Opera, younger versions of Opera, maybe not. But for the most part, it's supported. So we'll look at SVG and Canvas later on. Okay, so we're going to very briefly talk about Canvas. And then I'm going to focus mostly on SVG. So just a little bit about Canvas. So why do we use Canvas? There are times when an interface requires that an image be provided on the fly. So that's where Canvas can come in handy. So we can actually change the image based on certain parameters. So it's a little bit more dynamic than just a static image that we include on the page. So for example, a line graph showing the temperature forecast, that could be something that we create on the fly, and Canvas comes in handy for that. So HTML, this is it's a newer element, but it provides the Canvas element for occasions such as this. What it is basically an empty bitmap image, and then we can draw on it using JavaScript. So there is a bit of sort of programming that is involved. So HTML Canvas element is used to draw graphics. It's kind of a container. Think of it like a container, but you can do stuff like create dynamic graphics, use them for online and offline games. You can create animations and create interactive video and audio. So it has quite a lot of possibilities that you can do with it. So we're going to take a quick look at some Canvas code. We're going to focus mostly on SVG and building some SVGs today, but I have given you an example of Canvas. If you go under Module 12, canvas.html, and just go ahead and download that file. I'm going to provide you with the code, and we're kind of just going to walk through it and see what's going on. So if you open it up in your browser as well as your code editor, so we can take a look at it on the screen as well as the code behind it. So we're creating a simple line chart here using Canvas. I guess you could even just maybe inspect instead of opening it up in your code editor, but it might be easier to read using your code editor. So again, Canvas uses a lot of JavaScript. It's JavaScript that's basically creating the stuff that we see on the page, and Canvas kind of just works as the placeholder. So here we are. We have our HTML, canvas.html element. A couple of things going on here. If we look, the only real elements that we have on the page is this div with the chart container. So what we're doing here, we are waiting for onload, so making sure that it has loaded, and then we're going to go through and create a variable called chart, and we're working with canvas.js. So if you look at the canvas.js, there's some code here. Sorry, is there a question over there? Is there a question?
I'm just trying to figure out how you got the file.
How I got to the bottom?
How you got the file.
Oh, it's up on Blackboard. You can just download it. Should be. Yeah, you might have to, if you right click, you can go save link as, and that should download it for you. Yeah, sometimes if you click on it, it's just going to open it up for you. If it does just open up, you can just inspect it. So you can look at the source code if you want to do that. You can check out the elements. You can do it that way. And actually, you know what? That might be a better way to do it because then we can kind of look at the different elements. Let's do that. So open it up in your browser, and you can see here is our canvas element. So that wasn't really clear in the other file. Okay, so here is, we have our div. It has an ID of chart container, and then we've got some classes going on, but here is our canvas element. So we're setting that up to do things with it using JavaScript. So here's canvas. We're setting a width and a height. We could do that in CSS. We don't necessarily have to do that inline, but we can if we'd like. There's also some inline styles going on there. Again, that's not necessary. You can move that to a separate CSS file, but that is what's going on there. And then the thing that's actually creating the graph, that is the JavaScript. So that's what is creating that. So with JavaScript, we're working with the canvas element to create that. So I'm going to see if I can open this like this. That's not the right file. Okay, we're going to come back to Canvas. We're going to skip ahead. I think I have the wrong file, so I'll put the right file up there. We're going to skip ahead to SVG, and then we'll come back to Canvas. And that's what we're going to do. So working with SVG, scalable vector graphics. So some of you have worked with them, some of you have not. Super powerful. They're very flexible. And instead of like Canvas, they're not an embedded bitmap image. They're actually objects. So we can work with them a little more. They're a little more flexible. So they can be used to create an image either by specifying all the lines and shapes necessary. So you can actually create SVGs programmatically by using code, or you can create them using something like Adobe Illustrator, and you can export your SVG file, either the code or the image yourself, and embed it as an object. So that's good because it gives front-end developers and designers the ability to manipulate SVG with CSS. It has that flexibility, just like any other part of the document object model. So we can work with SVG, we can set CSS on the different elements, and we'll see what that looks like. So can I use, again, SVG is pretty well supported now. So across the different browsers, we see pretty good support. Again, older versions of IE will always be a problem, but for the most part, you have support for SVGs. So we'll talk a bit about the basics. Basically, it's an XML document that allows for different shapes to be made. So each it has elements for things like circles, rectangles, simple and complex curves. So you can do a lot of stuff with SVGs, and you're actually just creating those elements. So those are available for you. So simple SVG doc, it's nothing more than just an SVG root element. So SVG is actually an element. And then within that element, you're going to have things like rectangle or circle or whatever shape you're trying to make. So you can get fancy. You can add things like gradients, rotations. You can add filter effects and animations. But basically, we can just create different shapes and then do stuff to those shapes, either with CSS or JavaScript or even the SVG itself. So when we're working with SVG, we're working with the grid. So just like Canvas, Canvas also works with the grid. It works from the top left corner of the document. So everything is placed from the top left corner. That would be the point of origin, which is 0, 0. And then the positions are then measured in pixels from the top left corner and the positive X direction. So it works from this. So here we have X and then we have Y. And if you want to, this is a really good tutorial that takes you through, and that's my source for the image. This takes you through SVGs and how the grid actually works. But we'll take a look when we start to code. We'll see how that grid system works by moving things around on the page. Which is now. Okay, so open up a new file and we're going to start really basic, just some basic SVG shapes, and then we're going to play around with things like gradients and filters and all kinds of stuff. So you can save this as svg.html. So we'll start off, we're going to do a couple different things. So we're going to work with different sections in our document. And we're going to start with the basics first of all. So just taking a look at what SVG looks like, how we set it up, what an SVG element looks like. So you can create a section, put an H2 in there, the basics, and we will create our first SVG. So when we're setting up SVGs, we want to add a version. So the latest version is 1.1. So that's the one we will be working with. We can also add things like base profile. So these are all attributes of the SVG element. You can add all that. That is good practice. We can even set a width and height, although I would suggest probably a good idea to do that through CSS. So you don't have to set a width and a height on your SVG element, because in CSS we can target this SVG element. So base profile full, and then you can put a source if you like, but we'll just leave it as that for now. You can get away with just actually putting SVG, but we'll leave the version and the base profile in there for now. So we're just going to start by creating some simple shapes. So we have our SVG element set up, and then within that, that's where we're going to create our shapes. So outside of that SVG, if we tried to do something like a rectangle, it's not going to work. It has to be embedded within that SVG element in order to be recognized as an SVG and for us to be able to use that. All right, so we're going to create a rectangle to begin with. So again, we can set a width and a height right on the actual element itself, but we don't have to. We could always set this up in our CSS file. You can also add a fill. All right, so there's our rectangle. If you save that, we can check it out in the browser. And you have to put actual measurements there, so we'll set that up. And there we go. So we have our little rectangle. So we could make it bigger if we liked. We could change the color. But just by using the rectangle element inside of our SVG element, we very easily created a rectangle. So we can also create things like circles. So we're going to make this a bit bigger. Let's actually set this to, we're actually going to set the width of the SVG just in line. Again, probably best to do this in CSS, but for now we're just going to stick it in line. We'll set that to 300 and the height to 200. So that's the height of the SVG itself. And so go and look at that in the browser. My little rectangle disappeared because it's now 1 pixel. And we inspect the element, so check it out. Here's your SVG. So we set it to a width of 300 by 200. We can actually use something called a view box, which we'll look at in a minute, to set that as well. And then within that, we have our rectangle. So here's our rectangle inside of our SVG element. And our rectangle is currently set to 100 by 100. We could also just use percentages. So we could say 100% and 100%. And that will fill to the parent element, which is the SVG. So here now it is whatever we set this to, so 300 by 200. So we can put different units there. So it doesn't have to be pixels. We can set it to percentages. That will work as well. So we're also going to add a circle inside of our SVG element. So circle, you'll notice there's a few different attributes here. We haven't really done anything here other than set the width and the height and the fill. Circle, you're going to see some other attributes that you might not have seen, definitely probably haven't seen before. So we have CX and then CY. And we can fill that. Let's just set it as black. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So CX and CY, that pertains to that whole grid thing. So those are the coordinates. So if we look here, we are going to position that. CY, fill, what's going on? Oh, sorry, you need a radius too. So we'll put a radius of 80. Fill is good. So CX, CY, and R. Okay, should be good now. Or not. Let's try. It keeps wanting me to put a closing. Maybe that's why. Okay, I'll have to come back to the circle. That should work. We'll try another shape and we'll come back to that. It could be. So it's funny. The file that I have and I did last night worked. I don't think it needs a closing tag. It shouldn't. I think it's a void element, but let's see what's up. What's up? Oh, yeah, sorry. But so, I don't know. The code that I did last night, I did not have closing tags, but probably that'll work. Okay, so strange. I'm wondering, okay. We'll stick with the closing tags then. So you can see our circle is not positioned 0, 0. Another thing too, when you see capitals for the attributes, that is absolute. So that's absolute to the page itself. When you see lowercase, it is relative, so it's relative to the parent. So if I move this, and you can play around with this as well, you'll see that it will be positioned in a different spot. So we now have 0, 0. If we did something like, see what happens, so just move it around like so, and it's completely probably out of the SVG itself. Yeah, so it's down here, which is kind of out of there. So we can move certain things around. We will keep it at 150 and 100. So when we're working with SVGs, it's also important to know that the order is how those are positioned on the page. So if I were to switch it up and I put the circle before the rectangle, you won't see the circle because the circle is now going to be behind the rectangle. So we can see here it's there, it's just covered with the rectangle. So order is important when you're working with SVG. So circle, rectangle, we can do ellipse, that's another shape. We can do paths, we'll look at it in a minute. We can also do text. So text, again, we're going to put the position, so we'll put it 150, 125. So we're going to want that to actually be on top of the circle, kind of in the middle of the circle, so we'll see if we can get that. Font size, because this is an element, we could actually just set the font size using CSS, or we can do it like this. So we'll set it to 24, which would be pixels. Text anchor, so we can try and anchor it in the middle. And then we can set the fill, we'll just set that to white. And then, of course, you're going to need some text in there. So if we open that up, we should see our circle come back. There's our text. Again, that's on top of the circle because of the way we've ordered those elements inside of our SVG element. We've kind of tried to get it in the middle of the circle. Should probably do a better job with that. I think that's going to be way off, but yeah. So 150 seems to be good. Maybe 115. Getting closer. So again, we could take this font size and move it outside to our external CSS. That would probably be a better idea. We kind of want to keep that stuff separate. We want to keep our HTML separate. But because SVGs are sort of images anyway, we're kind of intermingling our presentation and semantics or content as well. So maybe it makes sense. So that's kind of your call whether you want to. But if we want to see how to do that, it's just like any other element. So instead of setting the font size here, I could go up just quickly, create a style element, and I can just target it as the text. It's a text element. So we can target it that way. It's just like any other element. So, and that's why SVGs are so great, because we can target them with CSS. We can also do things with them using JavaScript. So we could also do the fill too. So you could take that in your CSS and change the color of the text element using that. You would have to use fill and not color, because it's not text. It is actually sort of like it's part of the SVG, right? All right, so we're gonna look at the grid before we take a quick break. So let's create another section. And we'll see how this grid thing works. So here's our SVG. We've set it up. We can set a width and a height here, or we can also, what we'll do, we'll add the view box to this one. So go ahead and set a width attribute, the value of 200. Height, we'll set it to the same as the previous one. And then we'll take a look at view box. So view box is another attribute that's available to the SVG element, and any SVG element. And then we've got a couple numbers here. So if you save that, refresh, here's our grid title. Inspect that, you can see, we should see, so there's that. The view box is actually going to be smaller. It's actually going to be 100 by 100, but we can't actually see that just by inspecting just yet. So let's add a rectangle, and we're going to move the rectangle around inside of that view box to see how positioning works and how this grid thing works a little bit more in depth. So we'll start off just by positioning it X and Y to 0. And we can set a width and a height as well. Okay, so here is our rectangle. Right now it's at 0, 0. If we move it, so let's say, we'll take the view box off for a minute. Move it 150, 150, or actually 150, we'll move the X coordinate first and keep 0 as the Y coordinate so we can see how that will move. So again, here's our SVG, and then we are moving that. So we moved it X 150, Y is still 0. We keep X 0 and Y is 150. We can see that that now positions us right there. So we've moved down the Y axis. So we can see how the grid works. So wherever we want it on the page, keeping in mind, you might want to change that height and width of your SVG. So maybe we set that to 100%, so then we're not limited. So our SVG spans the whole width of the page, and maybe we want to move X 400. So it's now closer to the middle of the page. So we're positioning it according to the grid. So maybe we're sticking here. y to 0. And again, that is relative. It's not to the page itself, but it's 0 to the SVG. So if we actually, I'm going to move this up just to show you, we move that SVG to the top of the page. I'm going to get rid of width and height and put that as 0. So now we're right at the top. So that's maybe a better visualization of the grid. And then we can start to move it. And I just did that. You don't have to move yours. This is just for a demonstration. Then we can move it maybe 500. We'll see that it moves on the x-axis. Too far. There we go. And then putting that back to 0, moving it on the y. You can see how that moves that. Now it's running into other stuff, but that shows you how the grid works. Let's try one more thing here. So moving it back to where we had that, if we try x and y, no, okay, never mind, we'll leave that. Okay, so let's do one more thing before we take a break. We're just going to open up, so you can use, if you need to sign up for a free trial, Illustrator does have one, or you can just follow along as I do this. But there is that other option, the vector, which also works. So it's up to you. You can use Illustrator. There is a 30-day free membership if you want to sign up for that. But you can use vector as well, which is in your links. So it's the other thing you can use actually is Google. I think it's Google Drawings. So you can actually export Google Drawings as an SVG too. So that's an option as well. So I'll do that. So if you just Google Drawings, you should get a link, Google Drawings, and you can create some stuff in here. So maybe I'll create an arrow. So there's my drawing. So if I save that, I can actually save as an SVG. Pretty sure. Yeah, so you go to download. So your options are you can download it as a PDF, but you also have the option to download it as an SVG. And if we open that up, so there's a couple different ways you can open it up. Essentially, it's going to be code, just like we created. So you could open it up in, if you have access to Illustrator, you could open it up and check it out there. But you can also just open it up in your text editor. And if you do that, you'll see something similar, but much more complicated, I'm sure, to what we just did. So it's a little bit hard to read, but if we kind of separate things out, you can see that we've got, here's our SVG element, the opening tag. So they've got their version set up. They've got a view box. They have the fill set to none. There's a stroke line cap set to square. There is the link, so a couple different attributes set up there. There's the closing. They have, and I don't know where the opening one is. Where did it go? There it is. So they have this G element that's just used to group different images together. So I have my two images, the arrow and the star, and they've used the G element to group those together. And then they've used paths. So D stands for draw. There's clip rule. There's also, they've worked with fill opacity, the fill. So you see here in the path, the fill is set to black. So that's what creates that line. There's a stroke line cap. So there's different options there. So this, it's kind of neat. It's an image that I drew that has been transformed into code. And we can then work with that code using JavaScript, putting it in our HTML, and also with CSS. So we can access the path element, the clip path, the SVG element, and do certain things with it. All right, so let's take a break. Let's take 15 minutes now. When we come back, we will take a look at Canvas, but we're going to continue on with a few more things SVG related.